Hey everybody, it's Jason with Parallel Reality coming back with you here today with an article from March 26th from Newsweek, or I should say it's actually March 25th. It was updated on March 26th, and it is entitled, Israel Has Created a New Standard for Urban Warfare. Why Will No One Admit It? It is an opinion article, so just a heads up on that. I also just wanted to say, I think we're going to play a game on this called How Many Times Is a Pop-Up Going to Actually Pop Up while I'm going through this, because it's already done it twice while I've just been sitting here waiting to start recording. So let's see. Let's count that. We'll see how we can play that game. You don't win any prizes if you get it right. So let's just go right into it. We're going to close that. It says the Israel Defense Forces conducted an operation at Al-Shifa Hospital in the Gaza Strip to root out Hamas terrorists recently, once again taking unique precautions as it entered the facility to protect the innocent. Israeli media reported that doctors accompanied the forces to help Palestinian patients if needed. They were also reported to be carrying food, water, and medical supplies for the civilians inside. None of this meant anything to Israel's critics, of course, who immediately pounced, because that's what they do. Like, Israel could, it's like, apply to Israel what people talk about Donald Trump, where, like, Donald Trump could come out and cure cancer, and scientists could actually say, yes, it was Trump that did it, we can prove it, and then prove it, and people would basically be like, well, why did Trump do that? What about the cancer cells? It's the same thing with Israel, just on a much larger scale. So it says the critics, as usual, didn't call out Hamas for using protected facilities like hospitals for its military activity. Yeah, why would they do that? You're an anti-Semite. Anyway, nor did they mention the efforts of the IDF to minimize civilian casualties, which we know they're doing if you look at the actual death numbers from around there. And, of course, just the things that they do. But it says in their criticism, Israel's opponents are erasing a remarkable, historic new standard Israel has set. In my long career studying and advising on urban warfare for the U.S. military, I've never known an army to take such measures to attend to the enemy's civilian population, especially while simultaneously combating the enemy in the very same buildings. In fact, by my analysis, Israel has implemented more precautions to prevent civilian harm than any military in history, above and beyond what international law requires, and more than what the U.S. did in its wars in Iraq and Afghanistan. As the international community, and increasingly the United States, barely acknowledges these measures while repeatedly excoriating the IDF for not doing enough to protect civilians, even as it confronts a ruthless terror organization holding its citizens hostage. Instead, the U.S. and its allies should be studying how they can apply the IDF's tactics for protecting civilians, despite the fact that these militaries would almost certainly be extremely reluctant to employ these techniques because of how it would disadvantage them in any fight with an urban terrorist army like Hamas. And I'm not a military person. I've never served or did anything like that, and it is kind of amazing to see this sort of stuff, and I just don't know how guys do it. I mean, but good for them though for actually doing it. It says the predominant Western theory of executing wars, called maneuver warfare, seeks to shatter an enemy morally and physically with surprising, overwhelming force and speed, striking at the political and military centers of gravity so that the enemy is destroyed or surrenders quickly. This was the case in the invasions of Panama in 1989, Afghanistan in 2001, Iraq in 2003, and the failed illegal attempt by Russia to take Ukraine in 2022. In all of these cases, no warning or time was given to evacuate cities. And you saw, oh, look, pop up over here. You can see it right here. Hello, right over here. Let's try to close that out. All right, oh, it's the Google Ads thing, so it's probably going to come back. Anyway, so it says, in many ways, Israel has had to abandon the established playbook in order to prevent civilian harm. The IDF has telegraphed almost every move ahead of time so civilians can relocate, nearly always ceding the element of surprise. Now imagine that. Imagine if you were in an army, okay, and you had to tell the people that you were fighting, because there were civilians there, like, this is where we're going to be. Like, that puts you in extreme danger, but they still go ahead and do it because they want to save the civilians. So this has allowed Hamas to reposition its senior leaders and the Israeli hostages, as needed, though, through the dense urban terrain of Gaza and the miles of underground tunnels it's built. It says, Hamas fighters, who unlike the IDF don't wear uniforms, have also taken the opportunity to blend into civilian populations as they evacuate. The net effect is that Hamas succeeds in its strategy of creating Palestinian suffering and images of destruction to build international pressure on Israel to stop its operations, therefore ensuring Hamas's survival. Israel gave warning, in some cases for weeks, for civilians to evacuate the major urban areas of northern Gaza before it launched its ground campaign in the fall. And if you remember that, I remember saying this too, and I'm like, why aren't they going in there? Well, this is what they were doing. Since the IDF reported dropping over 7 million flyers, but it also deployed technologies never used anywhere in the world, as I witnessed firsthand on a recent trip to Gaza and southern Israel. Says Israel has made over 70,000 direct phone calls, sent over 13 million text messages, and left over 15 million pre-recorded voicemails to notify civilians that they should leave combat areas, where they should go, and what route they should take. They deployed drones with speakers and dropped giant speakers by parachute that began broadcasting for civilians to leave combat areas once they hit the ground. They announced and conducted daily pauses of all operations to allow any civilians left in combat areas to evacuate. Since these measures were effective, Israel was able to evacuate upwards of 85% of the urban areas in northern Gaza before the heaviest fighting began. This is actually consistent with my research on urban warfare history and shows that no matter the effort, about 10% of populations stay. It says the war rages on. Israel began giving out its military maps to civilians so they could conduct localized evacuations. This, too, has never been done in war. It says during my recent visit to Khan Yunis, Gaza, and the IDF Civilian Harm Mitigation Unit in southern Israel, I observed as the army began using these maps to communicate each day where the IDF would be operating so civilians in other areas would stay out of harm's way. Again, they're basically telegraphing what they're going to be doing to the possible enemy, and they're still going ahead and doing their thing. Risky as all hell for them. So I saw that the IDF even tracked the population in real time down to a few block radius using drone and satellite imagery and cell phone presence and building damage assessments to avoid hitting civilians. The New York Times reported in January that the daily civilian death toll had more than halved in the previous month and was down almost 2/3 from its peak. Wow, the New York Times actually doing some actual reporting. How about that? Says, of course, the true number of Gaza civilian deaths is unknown. The current Hamas supplied estimate of over 31,000 does not acknowledge a single combatant death, nor any deaths due to the misfiring of its own rockets or other friendly fire. And plus, remember that Hamas also considers civilians, the regular fighters as civilians. So this number is a lie, okay? And you keep hearing it being floated around, especially in left-wing circles. It's a lie. And there's a video I did, I don't remember when it came out, but you can also look up the article. I don't remember exactly what site it was on. It might have been Tablet or Compact or something like that. But there's a person who's a statistician who actually goes over the number of deaths that Gaza's been reporting every day, and it's a literal straight line up. It increases the exact same percentage every day, which I think anybody with half a brain would go, yeah, that doesn't really make sense. How can the exact same percentage of people being killed every day, how can there be the exact same percentage of people being killed every day? So let's continue with the article here, because again, that 31,000 number is a bunch of BS. It says the IDF estimates that it has killed about 13,000 Hamas operatives, a number I believe credible, partly because I believe the armed forces of a democratic American ally over a terrorist regime. Yeah, I mean, that makes sense. But also because of the size of Hamas's fighters assigned to areas that were cleared and having observed the weapons used, the state of Hamas's tunnels, and other aspects of the combat. Says that would mean some 18,000 civilians have died in Gaza, a ratio of roughly 1 combatant to 1.5 civilians. Given Hamas's likely inflation of the death count, the real figure could be closer to 1-to-1. Either way, the number would be historically low for modern urban warfare. As the UN, EU, and other sources estimate that civilians usually account for 80% to 90% of casualties, or a 1-to-9 ratio in modern war, though this does mix all types of wars. This is in the 2016-17 Battle of Mosul, a battle supervised by the U.S. that used the world's most powerful air power resources. Some 10,000 civilians were killed compared to roughly 4,000 ISIS terrorists. And yet, analysts who should know better are still engaging in condemnation of the IDF based on the level of destruction that still occurred, destruction that is unavoidable against an enemy that embeds in a vast tunnel system under civilian sites in dense urban terrain. This effects-based condemnation or criticism is not how the laws of war work or violations determined. These and other analysts say the destruction and civilian casualties must either stop or be avoided in an alternative form of warfare. Ironically, the careful approach Israel has taken may have actually led to more destruction, since the IDF giving warnings and conducting evacuations help Hamas survive. It ultimately prolongs the war and with it its devastation. Yeah, that makes sense. Israel has not created a gold standard in civilian harm mitigation in war. That implies there is a standard in civilian casualties in war that is acceptable or not acceptable, that 0 civilian deaths in war is remotely possible and should be the goal, that there is a set civilian to combatant ratio in war no matter the context or tactics of the enemy, but all available evidence shows that Israel has followed the laws of war, legal obligations, best practices in civilian harm mitigation, and still found a way to reduce civilian casualties to historically low levels. Yeah, but they're never going to get credit for it. It says those calling for Israel to find an alternative to inflicting civilian casualties to lower amounts like 0 should be honest that this alternative would leave the Israeli hostages in captivity and allow Hamas to survive the war. That alternative to a nation's survival cannot be a path to extinction. Yeah, I mean, this is another excellent analysis of what's actually happening there from someone who is an expert in this sort of stuff. John Spencer, right there. Just wanted to put his name back up. It says he's a chair of urban warfare studies at the Modern War Institute at West Point, so he knows what he's talking about. Says he served for 25 years as an infantry soldier and 2 tours in Iraq. Yeah, knows what he's talking about, I would certainly say. So, yeah, what do you think about this? I mean, for all the folks out there, I mean, especially if you're somebody who disagrees with what's happening there and you're anti-Israel, like, what do you think about stuff like this? When it turns out that the numbers that you believe are the truth are not actually the truth, and it's kind of being debunked all over the place. But let me know what you think in the comments below. Like, share, subscribe, and I will talk to you soon. Bye.